Hello, dear PWA aficionados! This video is a response to multiple questions by agencies, Magento agencies, who are wondering how they can deliver the project that their customers want. Because, yes, they got ready-made Scandi PWA, it's out of the box, it's awesome, it's fast and performance, SEO-friendly, increased conversions, but where to take React developers? We have normal developers, right? We have certified Magento developers, front-end, backend, cloud, OMS, anything you want, but we need React this time for PWA. So here are some answers. And first of all, the motivation for this question, that PWA is the enter mainstream. And there is a solution, but the tech stack this solution is built is alien to a usual Magento agency. At least we had a lot of questions from, well, what we call a usual Magento agency. And this tech stack has a learning curve. So it's not just a new PHP version. It's not just something you can master in a few hours. And also, it introduces different workflows because data travels differently. Client-side rendering has its own peculiarities. So, again, another complexity. And the question agency said, okay, what if we hire some React devs? Or what if we hire a remote React team from a company who specialized in React for some time? How do we organize their work with our Magento developers, with our backend developers? And why this question surfaces? Because apparently Magento agencies with an experience understand that front-end and backend, they have to play well together, and developers have to play well together, but to play a game you need to know the rules. Are these the rules? Oh, okay. So the rules, well, it's not, these are not the rules, this is a playground where we are playing. On the right hand side there is a well-known Magento team. Magento database, Magento backend, and recently introduced GraphQL server, well, possibility to request data in GraphQL modules through GraphQL resolvers. It's part of Magento installation, you just put here separately. And on the front end, we have reactive applications, reactive front end, view components that are requesting some data that is managed by a wrapping React container, and React container is fetching the data in a flux pattern through Redux. Redux is managing state. State of React component is is an array of data, inventory of data that is currently up to date for the particular component. And through Redux we can also see and manage who is updating this data, when and how. So it improves debugging. So already sounds like what? Especially if you used to live in a Magento-only world. That's how the data travels. And if you have a so-called default Magento shop, then there is, well, not so many issues because all this data transport, data exchange, also including Redis, where we store queries, and Varnish, where we store responses to these queries, in between of Redux and GraphQL server. This is all managed by Scandi PWA. But what if your project involves certain customizations? So you have new data entries, data variables, data types, new tables and columns in your Magento database. And this data is somehow manipulated in backend, and then it's served on the front end. Probably users can do something with this data, send it back. And then we have this question that we need to address, because all these frictions between front-end and backend become not when we just customize existing features and existing layouts. Then you just hire React dev, you tell, hey, here is a theme, we need to change colors, fonts, and minor positioning changes. Awesome, done. This conversation usually arises from an agency who understands that Magento is here for a purpose. Magento is here to enable how SaaS solutions tell extreme customization, or Magento calls it unprecedented flexibility for user experience. So we usually have custom things cut to the size, cut to the purpose. Well, it generally involves customizations. Magento is great in this particular aspect. So when things change on the backend, we need to make sure that it matches with the front end. Otherwise, we have awesome designs. We have given these designs to React developers. They have done something, but how to make sure that it's, the data from front end and backend is propagated to each other? How to make sure that it caches efficiently? How to make sure that we handle data scenarios, that sometimes we send data like short data, sometimes long data, sometimes no data. We also have to handle this scenario. So Magento agencies were telling, okay, we want to have a React team work on the front end while Magento team works on data import and backend interface, but we don't want to delay the project overall, path. We don't want to have them one after another on this project critical path chart. We want them to drive simultaneously, but we understand that it's a challenge. Sometimes React team will be working remotely and will not even overlap with the backend team, neither in place nor on time. So we just get something and then we have to apply it to what we have built on Magento 2 instance in terms of data migration, some custom modules. Well, and sometimes we tell, well, customer is really into PWA because of user experience, so we want a tool for quick prototyping. So we want some tools that will allow us certain interactivity. How do we do this? And apparently, agencies are asking these questions. They want to handle some risks, because sometimes a theme is finished, it looks awesome, and then we apply it to our instance and custom features don't work. Well, we see some data in the backend, we see this data in the database, but front end is just stuck. It's just the same, whatever, 73 bonus points, no matter what is happening in the backend. So we change data in backend, it doesn't propagate to front end. We delete it and nothing happens. Or sometimes we just figure out that data is hard-coded on the component view layer. So the guys were not really aware of Magento static blocks or page builder, so they saw a slider on the designs, and you see 6 images in the slider with links to products. All of this is hard-coded. There is no even interaction with Redux or container. It's just a decoration of 6 slider blocks. Also, sometimes frontend doesn't handle data scenarios. So if we have an image, it will display an image. What if we don't have an image? What is a dummy image? What is a placeholder image? Much more. There are much more risks. I think you have your own story. I would be really happy to hear and append this presentation with your stories. Please share in comments. Please join our every week Wednesday online sessions with agencies. Share your story. How frontend plays with the backend. And the question, how to enable both teams, frontend and backend, to work efficiently individually and or collectively, and eventually merge their efforts in a beautiful and performant PWA project. So, to the solutions. The first solution that we see here has some stars that indicate some changes from default Magento on the level of database backend. And in this particular case, we propagate these changes, or we simulate these changes that are upcoming. So the team is working on making it work. But we simulate the expected result on the level of GraphQL server. Well, specifically, we create certain resolver that will not, of course, communicate with Magento database. We request some images, or we request some points, and we get 100, 200. And if we request images, we will get images. If we want to request no images, then some of the array that we are returning will have some null positions. Well, let's look in this. So why it's called end-to-end simulation? Because in this case, a team working on front-end, they will need to set up Magento with Magento-based GraphQL server. There is also another way that is a base simulation. We will look at it later. So that is the difference, or like one of the differences. How you can, run ahead of time and simulate the responses before the, vehicles to provide these responses will be created, tested, and put into at least dev or stage mode. So first of all, we have to agree on the data structure and data schema, GraphQL schema, with backend developers. Sometimes, well, something from it you can see on the front end. So that's the data variables we're exposing to the customers. They can be some more in the backend. Well, here on the GraphQL level, we are mostly concerned with the customer-based interaction. But one way or another, we can decouple. The first step in decoupling front-end and back-end and respective teams is by having like a contract or having a way to merge the results. And here's the common denominator to some extent is data schema. That is converted in GraphQL schema and is hard-coded as a response on the GraphQL server. Well, and if we need to change something, we just go there and we change this response. And once database backend part is completed, we override hard-coded resolver, and we start to provide, real data. Good thing is that no changes to the theme are necessary. So our React View components, container, React container, Redux, they are working with this GraphQL resolver as if it is, real. What is not real is that we are just creating a certain module that stores that is replying with hard-coded data, just with whatever string of JSON. And then we change it, and then we are expected to see an expected result without anything expected to change on the theme on the progressive web app level. Delivery can be validated based on initially agreed data structure, sample data. This particular way generally helps to contract because we can define the delivery and the kind of contract terms. So here is our data structure. Here is our data samples. Here are certain data scenarios, and that's how they're expected to work on the front end. And then generally you can judge the delivery based on these scenarios. Well, of course, designs as such, plus certain interactivity. So sometimes we expect that some data will be sent, like some bonus points that customer has decided to spend together with purchase, or customer can upload some images to lookbook. And sometimes some custom data needs to be received, for example, some additional information on the product in whatever PDF files. So we need to render it nicely on PDP. So it's an additional either attribute or there is some way we want to treat it in the design, and then once we specify some sample files, then we can evaluate the performance of team based on these sample inputs, and we can also agree to change them. Okay, for this product, okay, we load the page and we change something in GraphQL resolver. We change these hard-coded values, we refresh the page, and we expect it to get a changed result. So, for example, there are no files. So we expect that this block will gracefully disappear, or will be visible, but will show the tags that whatever construction instructions are not available for this particular product. So, and if something doesn't work, So you see, okay, it was all great and nice, but once we overridden our hard-coded resolver, things stopped work, or some things. So we can bring mock data back, see that, okay, it still work, we can debug, we can compare our mock data with actual GraphQL response from server. Maybe it's new data type, maybe new data, maybe less data in some particular case, and we didn't account for it. So probably, I mean, either our contract has to include that, okay, that what happens if we don't get any images on PTP, or we don't get pricing, for example? Should we plan for it or not? But this is the dynamics of the approach to decoupling front-end delivery with backend by simulation responses on the level of GraphQL server. It can help for prototyping, for example, because you can showcase to the customer different layouts, different page compositions based on different inputs you provide there. So what else have we got? In this setup, we have stars that denote that we have some changes on the database and backend level, but our GraphQL server is intact. We are not doing there anything. Instead, we use affordance to change fetch query to mock query. Practically, it means that you do not change arguments. So fetch and mock. It will be the same arguments, and then, well, the thing is that when you do mock query, then the response will be read from a mock registry instead of executing a request. And once you are happy with the result and your backend team tells, well, we expect that our response will be exactly as you expect it to be, then you change mock query to fetch without changing arguments, and well, it's expected to work. So it's app-based simulation because in this case, the team can work without, completely detached from Magento. They don't need GraphQL server. Well, at least to some extent. They still need it for for the application to run, because all through one redirects, or say understanding where we are in terms of navigation, is it a category page or PTP, is still coming from there. So some modules, some components can be developed without this connection. So there is some benefit possibly in this setup for some teams. And well, yeah. So on the code level, you expected to change fetch query to mock query, keeping the same arguments, and then create mock query registry to place data to be fetched. So data can be fetched by URL, type, or tag. Tag has its own detail, is that then switching back to fetch, you will have to remove the tag. So the minus is that the arguments that you are passing will not be consistent between mock and fetch. Well, and here, once backend part is ready, we need to replace mock with fetch and see the result. And the risk here is that if teams are detached, and there are many components, and there are some components that depend on the data requested by containers, on kind of upstream components. So these teams that will get this theme as a delivery will need to look for all the components for mock queries and figure out, like, do we need to change all of them? Do we change it one by one? So there is some additional work is requested if the teams are completely detached. And some agencies tell that for them, such setup would be beneficial, because, say, this setup they consider to be good if they are requesting a theme, I would say, like, as a product. So it's easier for them to define expectations and contract. While here, it's easier for them to work together, to collaborate between teams if it's the same, say it's the on-site team in the agencies. Because while, say, I'm working on the front end and you're working on the back end, we are discussing the data schema, we are up to date what's going on in terms of data scenarios. And then while I'm developing my front end rendering based on mock data, loading it through mock query, well, when I'm ready and you are possibly ready with your backend, then I change it to fetch and then we debug it together. And if we are like part of the same team, then we deliver this feature together. And at the same time, if it's an external team, it's not so easy to limit the contract, well, unless you explicitly define certain testing scenarios. And then you involve Jester, and then you still have your mock query registry, but you invoke this data based on certain defined or contractual test scenarios, and you compare them with an expected result on a view. So to summarize, the data schema is a king. That's what eventually will bring front-end and back-end together and will ensure that it's operational. Schema is good, data scenarios, that's a next thing. We need to understand how does this king behave. What if we have less data? What if we have more data? Is it possible? What if this data is, is unexpectedly differentiated? Not just that sometimes there is no data, and how we also define the absence of data. Say just empty string is empty string or it's absence of the data. Then we have to figure out our level of where we decide to choose to simulate these scenarios. On the app level, fetch mock, or on the server, GraphQL server, and then kind of mocking Magento module there on a level of GraphQL resolver. We define handover format. So if it's a delivery of a full feature, or you want to, to delegate theme development to a React team or to a React agency. So what is the format you expect from them, and validation mechanism, how would you validate that what they're handing over to you is in quality and in scope. Then there should be clear integration process of how this handed over delivery will be integrated and part of a successful overall project. Well, and then if all of this is carefully discussed and decided, then there are a very high chances that your project will be successfully done. Well, we are consulting several agencies already on the workflow, so if you have any questions on this, if your case is way out of these two generic approaches that I have described here, please reach out to hello@pwa.com or just ask a question in a community Slack or in a YouTube video, and we will be glad to help. Thank you for watching. We'll keep in touch.